Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Last night, Fox News' primetime white supremacist and conspiracy theorist Tucker Carlson seemed to prime the pump for a midterm election version of Stop the Steal. Obviously, as a reminder, President Biden did win the election in 2020. It was free and fair in 2020, although former President Trump is still fomenting lies about it. But Tucker Carlson seemed to preview John Fetterman and the Democrats stealing the election in Pennsylvania. Let's take a look.
Keeps working. It's not about the person, it's about the party. It's not about the individual, it's about the group. And to prove it, they can even run mentally defective candidates who can barely speak and not only expect them to win, but expect you to accept the outcome no matter how transparently absurd it is. On November 9th, they'll be telling you that John Fetterman got 81 million votes in Pennsylvania, and they'll threaten to put you in jail if you don't believe it. Why wouldn't they do that? He worked with Joe Biden. Glenn Greenwald is an independent journalist. His work is on Substack. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. There's something about...
Of course. Glenn Greenwald is coming right up after that. We'll get to Glenn in a minute. Well, where do you start? Besides the cruelty of a mentally defective attack on John Fetterman, so kind of an insult to all stroke victims, many of whom might actually be Fox News viewers. But first he said, win, so already casting doubt that if Fetterman actually wins the election, that he actually won, so priming the pump for his viewers not to believe it. Then he says, not only do they expect you to accept that result, again, priming the pump for his viewers and Republicans around the country. He is the #1 rated cable news host with a predominantly conservative audience. 3 billion viewers typically watch him. But then he says, well, it already worked with Biden. So again, not so subtly kind of claiming that Biden didn't really win Pennsylvania and he got one over on voters and the country, and that Biden jailed people that didn't believe that he won Pennsylvania. I don't know if he's talking about before January 6th, people who didn't believe that Biden won Pennsylvania or the overall presidential election were jailed, or if he's talking about January 6th and that people were jailed for like storming the Capitol and trying to overturn the election, which, by the way, he with Fox Nation, which is their online thing, created like a conspiracy documentary that was a false flag, which it wasn't. It's just one giant jumbled mess. But Tucker Carlson in that clip is doing several things. Number one, he's obviously being cruel to John Fetterman, which if you watched my video yesterday, I mean, I was pretty open. It was a disastrous debate for John Fetterman. We can't pretend it wasn't. I don't really know what Tucker Carlson is referring to because I watched a lot of coverage yesterday. I watched CNN. I watched MSNBC. I mean, corporate media typically lies, you know that, but the coverage wasn't really that favorable to John Fetterman. CNN had pundits on pointing out that it was pretty bad for him. They had doctors on and medical people on saying that his injuries seemed to be worse from that stroke than he has let on. MSNBC even, which is obviously Democrat DNC headquarters, even had on some guests that said it was a bad performance. So I don't really know like what Tucker Carlson is getting at. His little 15-minute monologue, please don't watch it. It might give you brain damage. Seemed to insinuate that the media was covering for John Fetterman. The media coverage I saw wasn't covering for John Fetterman, and it was actually covering John Fetterman's disastrous performance more than Dr. Oz's repeated lies on his abortion record, on his hawking quack diet pills and other things as a TV doctor. So Tucker Carlson, to be clear, what he's doing is very dangerous. And why it's very dangerous is he knows, because he's probably in communication with a lot of the people perpetuating this. It's already been shown that Tucker Carlson routinely text messaged with Alex Jones, among other batshit conspiracy theorists in the right wing. But Tucker Carlson knows full well President Trump, former President Trump, is already plotting to overturn the election in Pennsylvania, starting in Philadelphia. This is from Rolling Stone. In early September, Donald Trump welcomed a handful of Republican allies to Manhattan's Trump Tower with an urgent message. He saw a, quote, scam happening with midterm election voting in Philadelphia and elsewhere in Pennsylvania, and he wanted conservatives to do something about it. Quote, during our briefing, he was concerned that 2020 is going to happen again in 2022, says former senior Trump administration official Michael Caputo, referencing Trump's debunked assertion that voter fraud in Philadelphia helped win Pennsylvania for Joe Biden. Caputo, who attended the meeting alongside Bradford County Commissioner Doug McClinko and retired CIA officer Sam Faddis, says they had a message back to former President. Quote, our team encouraged him to be concerned. Furthermore, I'm advising Republicans to recruit and train election observers and a team of attorneys to oversee historically problematic precincts. Just to translate that, historically problematic precincts means where the most black people vote, just so you're clear. But it's not just one meeting, and it's not just Philly. In recent months, Trump has convened a series of in-person meetings and conference calls to discuss laying the groundwork to challenge the 2022 midterm election results. Four people familiar with the conversations told Rolling Stone. In these conversations, pro-Trump groups, attorneys, Republican Party activists, and MAGA diehards often discuss the type of scorched earth legal tactics they could deploy. And they've gamed out scenarios for how aggressively to challenge elections, particularly ones in which a winner is not declared on election night. If there's any hint of doubt about the winners, the team plans to wage aggressive court campaigns and launch a media blitz. Trump himself set the blueprint for this on election night in 2020, when the race far from decided, he went on national TV to declare, frankly, we did win this election. Trump has been briefed on plans in multiple states and critical races, including in Georgia. But Pennsylvania has grabbed his interest most keenly, including in the Senate contest between Fetterman and Oz. If the Republican does not win by a wide enough margin to trigger a speedy concession from Fetterman, or if the vote tally is close on election night, Trump and other Republicans are already preparing to wage a legal and activist crusade against the, quote, election integrity of Democratic strongholds such as the Philadelphia area. I'm sure Tucker Carlson doesn't know about any of this, right? This isn't happening in a vacuum. I mean, look, this is from the Washington Post. Pro-Trump Republican court election volunteers to challenge any vote. Again, to challenge any vote. The Republican National Committee and its allies say they have staged thousands of training sessions around the country on how to monitor voting and lodge complaints about next month's midterm elections. In Pennsylvania, party officials have boasted about swelling the ranks of poll watchers to 6 times the total of 2020. In Michigan, a right-wing group announced it had launched Operation Overwatch to hunt down election-related malfeasance, issuing a press release that repeated the warning, "We are watching," 10 times. Supporters of former President Trump, who falsely claimed the 2020 election was stolen, have summoned a swarm of poll watchers and workers in battleground states to spot potential fraud this year. It is a call to action that could subject voting results around the country to an unprecedented level of suspicion and unfounded doubt. Quote, we're going to be there and enforce the rules, and we'll challenge any vote, any ballot, and you're going to have to live with it, okay? One-time Trump advisor Steve Bannon said on a recent episode of his podcast. To be clear, this is going to lead to violence. I could tell you, because I was out there in 2020 after election night for days. I was in Philadelphia, where you had Trump supporters on one side of the street fomenting and foaming at the mouth that the election was stolen, because that's what Trump was saying, and other people who were just kind of normal, waiting for the results to be tallied. And there was a bomb threat called into the Philadelphia Convention Center. And a family drove up from Virginia and was arrested with tons of weapons in their car. Guns. Since then, violent rhetoric, actual violence, political violence has only gotten worse. And now you have Tucker Carlson pumping Stop the Steal, and they're going to say John Fetterman got 81 million votes, which doesn't even make sense because that was the total for the presidential election. This is a Senate race, and you're just going to have to accept it. And if you don't accept it, you're going to get arrested, like Biden did to people who didn't accept his win. This is dangerous. And this isn't about whether you support Democrats or Republicans. I don't really care. I mean, I always tell viewers, vote for whoever you want, whether it's Democrats, third party. I mean, I'm not endorsing voting for Republicans, but it's not for me to tell you who to vote for. But this normalization of we're not going to accept the election results, we're going to have an army of poll watchers, which a lot of these poll watchers are militiamen. This is what happens in autocratic countries. This is what happens in fascist countries. And by the way, I don't truly believe we have an actual democracy. You can't claim we have a democracy when you don't actually have a majority of the people voting wins. We have an electoral college. So by default, we don't have a democracy. The popular vote doesn't win the election. I mean, what is it? Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. You had many Democrats before won the popular vote, but lost because of the electoral college lost them. So we don't actually have a democracy. We also don't have a democracy because we live in the United Corporations of America back here, and our government is bought. But under the idea of having a democracy is free and fair elections and actually having a peaceful transition of power. What Trump and now his minions are doing is trying to normalize stealing elections. They were not successful in 2016. Seems like they're trying to do a do-over and actually succeed this time. And by the way, after Tucker Carlson pushed that stop the steal bullshit, whatever you're calling Glenn Greenwald these days, I wouldn't call him a leftist. He went on to nod along and somehow give a lesson on George Orwell. Let's take a look.
Glenn Greenwald is an independent journalist. His work is on Substack. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. There's something about the unwillingness of people to acknowledge the obvious. If there was a candidate whose views I really liked, who had a performance like that, like Fetterman's performance, I hope I'd be honest enough to say, I agree with the guy, but that was disqualifying. There's something about the unwillingness to admit what everyone knows is true that, it's chilling, it's scary.
Yeah, I think it's a form of power. So often George Orwell was so prescient in what he predicted about how authoritarianism and tyranny would work. And in 1984, the novel we all read in high school, and his warning about how authoritarianism would happen, he described a tyrannical party, and he described as their final and most essential command that you are to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. If you can get a citizenry to do that, to trust what they're told more than what they're seeing and hearing on their own, that is a population that is put into extreme subservience.
It's funny because Glenn Greenwald, pretty much every time he goes on the Tucker Carlson show, he literally ignores the evidence of his own eyes and ears. Tucker Carlson, before he just came on, was pushing that the Democrats and John Fetterman were going to steal the election, that they were going to just tell people you have to accept it, and that for those who don't accept it, they were going to be jailed. So Glenn Greenwald, the journalist, came on right after Tucker Carlson, the conspiracy theorist, said that. And he did not say anything in response to that. He did not challenge Tucker Carlson. He did not say there's no evidence that that's going to happen. He then just went on some twisted logic, well dramatized Orwellian lecture that somehow the Democratic Party is tyrannical and they want you to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. I mean, I'm no Democratic Party stan. I think Joe Biden's awful. This channel routinely covers his corruption, broken promises. Frankly, the Democratic Party deserves what it gets. It's probably going to lose that. It's definitely going to lose the House, might lose the Senate. So this isn't about being pro-Democratic Party. I mean, Biden ran on a $15 minimum wage. He ran on a public option. Didn't do any of those things. Moonwalked away from them right away, claiming the parliamentarian stopped him. So this isn't, cry me a river for the Democratic Party. But you want to talk about ignoring the evidence of your own eyes and ears, Glenn? This is the channel, Fox News, that's currently doing pep rallies for Herschel Walker, who has threatened to beat his ex-wife. There's accusations of domestic battery. Now we have 2 or 3 women that he's paid for abortions while saying he's going to, if elected, push banning abortion in Georgia with no exceptions. Tucker Carlson seems to be ignoring with his own eyes and ears that about Herschel Walker. Ignoring the evidence with your own eyes and ears. The channel you're going on and basically live on is literally doing pep rallies and cheerleading for a series of election deniers like Carrie Lake in Arizona. I don't know, Glenn, you're a journalist. I'm sure you believe in evidence, and you always say that there needs to be evidence for claims that are made by the military and intelligence official. But I guess on politics, there doesn't need to be any evidence for an election being stolen. It's just, well, Fox will have me on, and I need to get people over to my Substack, so I'm not along. Such a shame. He was a great journalist, did amazing work on Snowden, but now he's just Tucker Carlson's golf caddy who comes on and nods after Tucker Carlson pushes crazy shit like the midterm elections is going to be stolen. He's also gone on and nodded along and not challenged Tucker Carlson after he's pushed the great replacement theory and a lot of other white supremacist conspiracy theories. Anyway, it's pretty dangerous what Tucker Carlson is doing. I mean, there's been a lot of threats now made against election workers because of this kind of talk. This is in 50 out of 67 Pennsylvania counties. Election chiefs have left because of threats, harassment, and intimidation. As contender Steve Bannon puts it, that's the way this is going to roll. I mean, a Fox News report, no less, elaborated on this. Let's take a look.
Election officials are now facing more death threats as we get closer to the midterm elections. Senior correspondent Eric Shawn is on that for us. So, Eric, security is also ramping up then.
It really is, and it has to be, Sandra, because there's active shooter training now for poll workers, bulletproof glass for offices. The democratic process of voting in our country, they say, is really under siege. Election officials reporting across the country that there has been an increase in violent threats against them. In Mesa, Arizona, police were called when voters saw so-called voter integrity activists in masks and touting guns monitoring the voting at a drop box. Authorities have launched voter intimidation investigations in that state. Election officials largely blame the threats on the spread of false election claims and lies about voting. The FBI now warning Pennsylvania election officials about the threats. That state's acting Secretary of State Lee Chapman, though, is pushing back against the election information.
You got to love how Fox News during the day reports on this like, oh, it's just armed people outside with masks. Why is this happening? Who might be inciting these people? And then in the evening, Tucker Carlson saying John Fetterman of the Democratic Party is going to steal the election in Pennsylvania. And they're going to tell you to just accept it. Accept the win, in air quotes, he puts it. And if you don't, they're going to jail you. Seems to be no correlation between these two things, right? Mind you, when Tucker Carlson does these things, the online message boards in white supremacist outlets like Gab, the Daily Stormer, 4chan, light up because they love this shit. It's extremely dangerous. I hope I'm wrong, but this kind of stuff is going to lead to violence.